Let us continue with your government exam preparation series. This is SS1 Topic 7. We are discussing the basic principles of government, specifically the rule of law, separation of powers, and checks and balances. This topic appears in your exams every single year. By the end of this lesson, you will understand the meaning of the rule of law, its principles and importance, the meaning of separation of powers, its advantages and disadvantages, the meaning of checks and balances, and how to answer exam questions. Take your notes. Let us go. First, what is the rule of law? The rule of law is the principle that no one is above the law. Everyone must obey the law. This includes ordinary citizens, government officials, and even the president. The law applies equally to everyone. There is no special treatment for the rich or powerful. The rule of law is the opposite of rule by men. In a system without the rule of law, the leader can do whatever he wants. He can arrest his enemies. He can take people's property. He can change the rules whenever it suits him. In a system with the rule of law, the leader must also follow the law. He cannot arrest people without a good reason. He cannot take property without following legal procedures. He cannot change the rules to benefit himself. The rule of law was explained by a famous legal scholar named A. V. Dicey. He identified three main principles. The first principle is that no one can be punished except for a violation of the law. This means that the government cannot arrest you or punish you just because someone does not like you. There must be a law that you have broken, and that law must be properly established in court. The government cannot invent new crimes on the spot. It cannot punish you for something that was not against the law when you did it. This is called the principle of legality. The second principle is that no one is above the law. Everyone must obey the law. Rich or poor, powerful or weak, young or old, everyone is equal before the law. The president must obey the law. The police must obey the law. The judges must obey the law. If the president breaks the law, he can be removed from office. If a police officer breaks the law, he can be arrested. The third principle is that the Constitution is the supreme law of the land. The Constitution sets out the powers of the government. It also sets out the rights of citizens. The rule of law requires that the government act according to the Constitution. If the government does something that violates the Constitution, the courts can stop it. The Constitution cannot be changed easily. In most countries, changing the Constitution requires a special process, like a supermajority vote or a referendum. Now let me explain the importance of the rule of law. Why is the rule of law so important? First, it protects individual liberty. When the government must follow the law, it cannot oppress the people. Citizens can go about their lives without fear of arbitrary arrest. They can say what they think without fear of punishment. They can practice their religion. They can own property. All of these freedoms depend on the rule of law. Second, the rule of law promotes economic development. Businesses need to know that the rules will not change suddenly. They need to know that their contracts will be enforced. They need to know that their property will be protected. When the rule of law is strong, investment flows in. When the rule of law is weak, businesses are afraid to invest. Third, the rule of law prevents abuse of power. Government officials are tempted to use their power for personal gain. The rule of law limits that temptation. Officials know that if they break the law, they can be punished. Fourth, the rule of law creates stability. When everyone follows the same rules, conflicts are resolved peacefully. People go to court instead of fighting. They accept the decisions of judges even when they disagree. This reduces violence and chaos. Fifth, the rule of law promotes justice. The legal system exists to protect the weak from the strong. Without the rule of law, the powerful would do whatever they want. The weak would have no protection. The rule of law creates a level playing field. Now let me explain the conditions for the rule of law to operate. For the rule of law to work, several things must be in place. First, there must be a written constitution that clearly defines the powers of the government. The Constitution must be the supreme law. Everyone must respect it. Second, there must be an independent judiciary. Judges must be free from control by the executive and the legislature. They must be appointed based on merit, not political loyalty. They must be protected from removal except for serious misconduct. Third, there must be a functioning legal system. There must be courts that are accessible to everyone. There must be lawyers who can represent people. There must be procedures for filing cases and appealing decisions. Fourth, there must be a free press. The media must be able to report on the government and the courts. When the press is free, it can expose corruption and abuse of power. Citizens need accurate information to hold their leaders accountable. Fifth, there must be a culture of respect for the law. Citizens must believe that the law is fair and that following the law is the right thing to do. This does not happen automatically. It must be taught in schools. It must be demonstrated by leaders. When leaders break the law and get away with it, citizens lose respect for the law. Sixth, there must be effective law enforcement. The police must be able to arrest lawbreakers. The courts must be able to punish them. If criminals are never caught or never punished, the rule of law is meaningless. Now let me move to separation of powers. Separation of powers is the division of government into three separate arms. These arms are the legislature, the executive, and the judiciary. Each arm has its own functions and powers. No person can serve in more than one arm at the same time. A minister cannot also be a legislator. A judge cannot also be a minister. The powers of each arm are clearly defined. The legislature makes laws. The executive implements them. The judiciary interprets them. The purpose of separation of powers is to prevent any one arm from becoming too powerful. If one arm held all power, that arm could abuse it. By separating powers, each arm checks the others. The advantages of separation of powers include the prevention of tyranny. No single arm can dominate. Protection of liberty is another advantage. Citizens are protected from government overreach. Efficiency is also an advantage. Each arm focuses on its own function. The legislature focuses on lawmaking. The executive focuses on implementation. The judiciary focuses on interpretation. This specialization makes government more efficient. Accountability is another advantage. When powers are separate, it is clear who is responsible for what. If something goes wrong, you know which arm to blame. The disadvantages of separation of powers include the potential for conflict. The arms may disagree, leading to gridlock. The president may veto laws. The legislature may refuse to approve appointments. The courts may strike down laws. When the arms are controlled by different parties, government can grind to a halt. Another disadvantage is the possibility of buck passing. Each arm may blame the others for failures. The executive blames the legislature for not passing laws. The legislature blames the executive for not implementing them. A third disadvantage is that separation of powers can be slow. Decisions require coordination among three separate branches. This takes time. Now let me explain checks and balances. Checks and balances are the mechanisms that allow each arm of government to limit the powers of the others. Separation of powers alone is not enough. The arms must also have the ability to check each other. The legislature checks the executive by approving budgets, ratifying appointments, conducting oversight, and impeaching the president. The legislature checks the judiciary by confirming judges and by impeaching judges for misconduct. The executive checks the legislature by vetoing bills. The president can refuse to sign a law passed by the legislature. The legislature can override the veto with a 2/3 majority. The executive checks the judiciary by appointing judges. The president chooses judges, though the legislature may confirm them. The judiciary checks the legislature by declaring laws unconstitutional. If the legislature passes a law that violates the Constitution, the courts can strike it down. The judiciary checks the executive by declaring executive actions unconstitutional. If the president does something that violates the law or the Constitution, the courts can stop it. The judiciary also checks the executive by issuing warrants, hearing cases against government officials, and interpreting laws that the executive must follow. A common exam question asks you to define the rule of law and explain its principles. Here is a sample answer. The rule of law means that no one is above the law. Everyone must obey the law. According to A.V. Dicey, the principles of the rule of law are that no one can be punished except for a violation of the law, that no one is above the law, and that the Constitution is the supreme law of the land. These principles ensure that government power is limited and that citizens are protected from arbitrary action. Another exam question asks you to explain the importance of the rule of law. Here is your answer. The rule of law protects individual liberty, promotes economic development, prevents abuse of power, creates stability, and promotes justice. Without the rule of law, the powerful would oppress the weak. Businesses would not invest. Conflicts would not be resolved peacefully. The rule of law is the foundation of a free and prosperous society. Another exam question asks you to explain separation of powers and its advantages and disadvantages. Here is your answer. Separation of powers is the division of government into the legislature, executive, and judiciary. The advantages include prevention of tyranny, protection of liberty, efficiency, and accountability. The disadvantages include potential for conflict, gridlock, buck passing, and slowness. Despite its disadvantages, separation of powers is essential for preventing the concentration of power. Another exam question asks you to explain checks and balances. Here is your answer. Checks and balances are mechanisms that allow each arm of government to limit the powers of the others. The legislature checks the executive through budget approval, oversight, and impeachment. The executive checks the legislature through veto power. The judiciary checks both through judicial review. Checks and balances ensure that no arm abuses its power. They work together with separation of powers to protect liberty. Here is what you need to take away. The rule of law means no one is above the law. Its principles include legality, equality before the law, and constitutional supremacy. The rule of law protects liberty, promotes development, prevents abuse, creates stability, and promotes justice. Separation of powers divides government into three arms. Its advantages include preventing tyranny. Its disadvantages include potential gridlock. Checks and balances allow each arm to limit the others. Together, these principles form the foundation of democratic government. Practice these concepts. When you have them down, move to topic 8.